All right, everybody, we are back with another Professional Picks Survivor League video. Let's get started looking at the 9 games that we're selecting this week, going from most likely favorite to least likely, taking the 9 heaviest favorites of this week that you might consider in your Survivor League. Starting as we normally do, looking at the teams that I would be cautious about and think twice about taking this week. And the first one being the Lions hosting the Bears after both teams in week 1 lost to their divisional opponents. The Lions only put up 13 points, a very lackluster offensive performance based on how they did last year with largely the same personnel, just missing Ben Johnson, who is now the head coach and play caller for the Chicago Bears. Bears didn't fare much better as they scored 27 or 24 total points, but 7 of those were by the defense. So really that offense was only able to muster up 17. I think what made me most nervous about the Lions was the lack of offensive production there. You weren't used to seeing that sort of deficiency from the offense, even prior to Ben Johnson play calling days and offensive coordinator days. So it was odd to see that inefficiency there. They're going up against the Green Bay defense that was definitely very formidable, especially with the addition of Micah Parsons. But that Bears defense too, it's hard to say because they were going up against J.J. McCarthy's first game, but they look pretty formidable as well, going up against one of the most elite offensive units in football that won 14 games last year. So I think anytime you get a divisional opponent, especially one that's only able to score 13 points, it's a little bit cause for concern. I do think the Lions turn around offensively, but until we see more games from them, it's hard to know what Lions team we're going to get after the change to offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator last year, who are both head coaches of different teams now, one of them being the Bears. I didn't think that those coordinator changes would be as detrimental to the Lions as maybe it appeared to be in week 1. Probably too early to make the decision on that, but still reason to be a little bit cautious around the Lions. Again, after only scoring 13 points, that offensive line not looking like the elite run blocking unit that it was just a season ago, after some guys on the interior of their O-line either retired or are shipped off to other teams. So I'd be a little bit nervous the Lions as they came out to a shaky start playing a divisional opponent who has Ben Johnson and maybe can turn it around with, again, a pretty high-powered offense unit the Bears have as well, backed by a pretty solid defense too. Another game sticking with the NFC North theme is the Packers, the aforementioned Packers, hosting the Commanders here. Thursday Night Football too, so a short week for both these teams. They both look pretty solid in the first week. Now, looking at PFF grades, which you take from with a grain of salt, but these are 2 top 5 teams in the PFF overall rankings. Regardless, these are 2 playoff teams last year and trending to be 2 playoff teams this year as well. Really, we're saying on a neutral site, this is a pick'em game, just about in the Packers' favor. Jaden Daniels has been playing tremendous football and struggled a little bit by the great pass rush by the Giants, but even so, the defense really held up against the G-men, who I thought would take a step up this year with Russell Wilson. I think there's still time, but that defense showing for the Commanders is what makes me very optimistic about them just going forward. And I think the Commanders prove a tough matchup for just about anyone in this league, the Packers included. And so I'd probably stay away from the Packers, just giving how hot the Commanders have been at the end of last season, coming into this season, taking care of business at home against a divisional opponent. Short week here, Jaden Daniels, a lot of offensive magic. You saw Deebo Samuel start to get in the mix. You still have Terry McLaurin on that offense, making things go around, and veteran Zach Ertz at tight end. I don't think this is the right spot to take the Packers, and I would avoid them this week with such a strong playoff caliber opponent like the Commanders that they're facing. One other thing that I saw from Jordan Love and what I had saw in that Packers game is he's still showing that inconsistency and at times inability to hit that intermediate throw. Can make every throw in the book deep pass downfield, which helps the Packers get really big chunk plays and put up points in a hurry. But what I continue to see him struggle with is making those 10 to 15 yard throws to his guys in the middle of the field, or sometimes, and even towards the sidelines, where sometimes the ball just gets away from him. Those aren't throws that even young into his career Jaden Daniels has been missing. So another reason to have some cause for concern with the Packers. That takes us to the best pick, and almost always, maybe not almost always, but often it is the team that's the heaviest favorite. I really like the Ravens here at home against the Browns. Now, kind of goes against the rule of the divisional opponent, but when you're a team like the Ravens that just put up 40 points and does so very often and lose, coming off a loss, this Ravens team, I can guarantee, does not start 0-2 this season. Um, it's hard to think that they dropped this game in the Browns just anecdotally. Speaking more towards the players, you saw the Browns really struggle against a pretty lackluster defense against the Bengals here, only able to put up 16 points. Granted, they easily could have won that game, but the offensive output just is not there for Cleveland. Certainly not against this really solid Ravens defense, and certainly not enough to match up with this high-powered Ravens offense, who's going to continue to run the ball and pass and utilize Lamar Jackson in every way they can all game long. You saw Derrick Henry break out a ton of different chunk plays, picking off like he did last season after a 1,900 rushing yard campaign. Him with Lamar Jackson is nearly an unstoppable rushing duo. And then at wide receiver for the Ravens, you got DeAndre Hopkins that made a highlight reel touchdown catch. You're starting to see Rashad Bateman emerge more and more in this offense. And old reliable Zay Flowers now coming into his third season, becoming a great PPR option and receiving option in the short and medium term throws. Like the Ravens here, I don't necessarily love the cover because you did see some great run defense and even a little bit of pass rush from the Browns that you're used to seeing. That coverage grade isn't the best, but the passing game isn't necessarily the Ravens' strong suit. At the end of the day, I have a hard time believing the Browns can keep up with the Ravens here and avoid the Ravens having an 0-2 start here. So really liking the Ravens this week and feel very confident in that pick. I think for the second week in a row, it doesn't happen often, but we got the Cardinals again as the best value. You have the Cardinals on the road against the Saints last week as the best value. I think you got one, maybe two more wins this season to get Cardinals at true value like this. I don't think you're going to see them being favored by 6.5 for the rest of the season. You got them hosting the Panthers at home. Panthers coming off a loss against the Jaguars, and a delayed game, but against I would call an average Jaguars defense. This Panthers team still had some troubles on offense, only scoring 10 points. Really not going to get the job done against most teams. And what was really the struggle for them is that the Panthers struggled to get a pass rush almost whatsoever, giving Trevor Lawrence so much time in the pocket to make throws. If you do the same thing with any quarterback, Kyler Murray included, he's going to pick you apart with one of three different options, all playing different positions, and that's Marvin Harrison Jr., the second-year phenom wide receiver, Trey McBride, all-pro tight end, and then James Conner out of the backfield. It's really hard to take away all three of those options as they're all coming from different levels of the offense. And when you give Kyler Murray time to pick it apart, he's going to do so in short order. For the Panthers, again, that defense is a big struggle, but then when you're scoring only 10 points on offense as well, it's really hard to win games. We're talking about a team that was the worst team in the league 2 seasons in a row and was only able to muster up 5 wins last season. Haven't really gotten their groove yet. Looking to see a little bit more of rookie wide receiver McMillan to get this offense going. But until that happens, you're pretty safe taking a team playing against the Panthers on the road. That happens to be the Cardinals here, who kind of were unimpressive, honestly, against the Saints. But when you're playing teams of the caliber that the Cardinals have been playing, that's how you win games. They only let up 13 points against the Saints. I would imagine you see a similar outcome against the Panthers, where they put up around 13 to 17 points. Cardinals all have to put up 20 plus to win the game. I think that's what they do here at home, especially again, as I think that inability to generate a pass rush from the Panthers will loom large again. Another game that's not, I don't think, as valuable as the Cardinals, but I think some really good value too here is the Rams on the road against the Titans. Titans defense was able to force 3 turnovers versus Bo Nix and that Broncos team, and yet was still only able to muster up 12 points here in week 1. This is the worst team last year. They didn't make a lot of additions in the offseason despite getting number 1 overall pick Cam Ward at quarterback. They didn't do a great job of building around him, especially from a wide receiver aspect, but neither from really a tight end or a running back aspect either. Basically what I'm saying is this, even with Cam Ward, this offense from Tennessee has just about the least amount of weapons in the NFL, going up against the Rams, who you can make the argument has the most weapons in the NFL, with Puka Nacua at wide receiver alongside Devontae Adams, and then Kyron Williams at running back with Matt Stafford, when healthy, playing great football. Believe it or not, even in their 14-point offensive outburst, PFF ranks this team the number one overall graded team in the NFL after week one, with actually the third highest ranked offense. And that's because if you watch that game, they went up against number one of the best defenses in the NFL in the Houston Texans, and Matt Stafford showed no signs of having a lingering back injury that was rumored to hamper him in week one. Made a lot of big time throws. He was extremely surgical and precise. I think he was like 21 of 29 of his throws. Very efficient football, and one of the better passing performances of the week despite a low offensive output, again because he went up against such a great defense with the Texans. You're going to have a different change of pace here. The Titans defense seemed to be pretty formidable against the Broncos in week one, but this Rams offense is simply on another level. I have a hard time seeing the Titans really slowing down this Rams offense and all the playmakers that I just mentioned for them. And on the flip side, I think the Rams have a very solid defense. I think a lot of people respect what the Texans have in offense, especially with C.J. Stroud and his offensive weapons. To hold that team to only 9 points is pretty impressive in my book. I think the Rams, if you use the Cardinals in week one and looking for some value here in week two, I think the Rams are a great option on the road against a bottom three team in the NFL with the Titans. Their only rivals right now, I think, are the Panthers and the Saints. You look at the schedule for these teams that I'm mentioning, especially these two value picks that I looked at. The Cardinals here, I can't imagine you're taking them through week 11 against anybody except Tennessee at home. Again, I just mentioned them as contenders for one of the worst teams in the league, who the Rams happen to be playing this week. And then when you look at the Rams, who they're taking, they don't have an easy schedule, especially outside of the division, or for a home game for a while. I think week 9, if you're not taking the Rams this week, is your week to take them, hosting the Saints. If you look at the games I'm highlighting, there's a lot of good matchups in week 9, though. You've got the Ravens with the Dolphins. You've got the Niners with the Giants, Chargers, Titans, Packers, Panthers. There's a lot of great options already just on this screen with the 9 teams I'm looking at in week 9. Might be a really good time to take the Rams this week. For the other games here, I mentioned the Panthers and Titans. I think very little of the Saints here. The Niners played some sloppy football, but were still able to beat on the road the division rival Seahawks. I think with the Saints and their, maybe uncharacteristic as of late poor defense here, I think you're going to see the 49ers and really just Christian McCaffrey kind of tear them up and take advantage of a lighter defensive front. On the same accord, Saints only put up, 13 points in week 1. I don't think they're going to be hovering too high above those totals really week in and week out this season with the offense they have in place. They really can only rely on Chris Olave at wide receiver and then Kamara out of the backfield. The recipe for the Saints winning really has to be utilizing those guys and getting a few surprise pop plays with Shaheed at wide receiver, the big play threat. But if you can contain really Olave in the pass game, you can contain a lot of the Saints offense with Spencer Rattler, who had a really abysmal throwing performance at quarterback, especially downfield, mitigating kind of the ways I think the Saints win, as I just mentioned, with Olave and Shaheed. You stack the box against this Saints team, you eliminate Kamara in the run game, you force Rattler to make throws downfield, and that's how you beat the Saints team, at least early on, until Rattler starts to figure it out. I think almost Christian McCaffrey alone. And Brock Purdy, who gets a lot of flack for some of his football, but he plays winning football. At least he doesn't win you games, but he helps you win games. And I think him, Ricky Pearsall, second-year wide receiver, and Christian McCaffrey are enough to beat this Saints team. But I think they're a lot better picks than the Niners on the road here this week, quite frankly. I think this is borderline trap game, but I'm getting tired of defending the Giants week in and week out, only to be let down. I think a lot of people are thinking the Cowboys are a really good football team because of the way they played the Eagles in week 1. But I'm kind of marking down the way the Eagles played in week 1 rather than mark up the way the Cowboys did. But that being said, you clearly see some offensive proficiencies from Dak Prescott and CeeDee Lamb if he can hold on to the football with this Cowboys offense. You can't say the same in almost any regard outside of Russell Wilson completely targeting Malik Neighbors there, wide receiver for the Giants. I think the way the Giants could have a threat to win this game is utilizing their really tremendous pass rush against a Cowboys offensive line that is weaker than it has been in past seasons. But again, hard to defend the Giants when they're only putting up 6 points a game and really unable to move the ball downfield with a weak running game and no option outside of Malik Neighbors, maybe Wan'Dale Robinson at wide receiver. But this Cowboys offensive line is not giving Russell Wilson any time to make throws anyways. So you don't need a great pass rush, which the Cowboys don't have, especially without Micah Parsons, to get to Wilson and give him a little bit of pressure too. I like the Cowboys here to get their first win of the season after now coming off a long week and some extra rest preparation for the Giants, but two, playing a pretty solid game, one they arguably could have won against the Eagles. Vikings Falcons is an intriguing game. I don't think I necessarily agree with this 4.5-point spread that the odds makers are, but what do I know? This is a primetime game. First one of J.J. McCarthy's career, or actually second one of his career. He's got back-to-back primetime games. In facing a fellow, I guess, sophomore quarterback at Michael Penix Jr. for the Falcons. I don't necessarily trust J.J. McCarthy just yet. I think he played well in the second half against that Bears game, but he still saw him make some pretty fatal mistakes with that pick six against the Bears in a really shaky first half. I think the Falcons have a solid defense, but more a solid secondary. We got like Jesse Bates at cornerback, safety there in Atlanta. And overall, if you're able to slow down the Buccaneers to only put up, how many points do they have? 17 in a really close game. 23 in a really close game. You're not used to seeing Baker Mayfield in that Buccaneers offense be on the wrong side of 30. That's a little bit of virtuistic capabilities of that Falcons defense. I also think the Falcons can kill you in so many ways on offense if it gets going, especially with Bijan Robinson out of the backfield. But if you watch the second half surge or a little bit of the late play the Falcons had last year, you know that Drake London's a real threat at wide receiver. Darnell Mooney, a real deep threat, is a number 2 option there. And then the ultimate wild card being Kyle Pitts at tight end, who no one can predict how he's going to play. I think the Vikings should win because you have a lot more consistency on that offense, but the real reason I'm hesitant on this game is quarterback play for them, but I think you can make the same argument for the Falcons. Bottom line, I think this Vikings team, J.J. McCarthy, is still too unproven for me to be comfortable taking them, even with a 4.5-point spread against the Falcons, coming off a loss and then going on the road into Minnesota and playing in prime time. Final one is almost a formality because you got a Chargers team playing their divisional opponent on the road. Chargers coming off a nice win in Brazil. Raiders coming off a nice win on the road against the Patriots. I really didn't think much of that Raiders game. I thought they didn't play very good football outside of tossing the ball at Brock Bowers as much as they could. They went up against the Patriots team that really didn't make as many strides as I thought they were going to after their numerous offseason additions. But I think the big takeaway I got out of both these teams in week 1 is that this Chargers team is for real. I think everyone thinks that now. I really like the way their defense played. I like the way they stick committed to the run game, work the play action pass. Justin Herbert looks downright surgical there at quarterback. I don't know if it's here to stay, but Quentin Johnston looks like a true number 2 wide receiver, maybe even number 1 in this offense, the way he played in week 1. Regardless, Herbert throwing the ball to Keenan Allen, who's still proved productive in the twilight of his career. Quentin Johnston and Ladd McConkey out of the slot. A lot of weapons here in this Chargers offense that the Raiders simply can't handle. And I think if you get a guy like Derwin James at safety, one of the most versatile safeties in the game and just defensive players in the game, cover him and shadow Brock Bowers there, certainly slow him down a little bit. I don't know what this Raiders offense truly has going for it outside of that. And I like the Chargers here to win this game, but not the right place or time on the road against the division opponent in all likelihood if you look at the schedule. Just a quick recap as we convene here. Ravens are the heaviest favorite this week for a reason. Look for them to get a win at home against the heartbreaking loss after the Bills in week 1. Cardinals for the second straight week are the best value in the NFL, I think, in Survivor. They're at home this time against the Panthers, who have a non-existent pass rush. Kyler Murray is already great at extending plays, should have ample time to find his 2 elite weapons in Marvin Harrison Jr. and Trey McBride. 49ers, who will be without George Kittle, go on the road against the Saints. I think the Niners, after playing sloppy football, will look to get the ball plenty of more times to Christian McCaffrey. I'd be a little bit afraid of a little bit of offensive decline with George Kittle being out, but ultimately the Saints team is pretty weak, and the Niners should still win handily. That being said, I don't think, especially ahead of this George Kittle injury news, this is the right time to take the Niners, even against a weak team like the Saints. Cowboys looking at their first win of the season after a long week playing the Eagles in a game they very well could have won on Thursday Night Football. Giants put up a league minimum 6 points in week 1, proving the offensive line cannot block for the quarterback or create holes in running lanes for the running backs. Really hard when both phases of your offense aren't producing outside of Malik Neighbors. It's going to be hard for the Giants to compete with many teams this year, especially the Cowboys, who look to be playing some better football than last with Dak Prescott back. If you used the Cardinals in week 1, I think you find tremendous values in the Rams in week 2. They're on the road against the Titans, but the Titans, outside of Cam Ward, seem to not have too many great weapons on offense outside of maybe Calvin Ridley, but I think this is one of the thinnest talent groups in offense in the NFL, going up against the Rams that have one of the most impressive performances, in my opinion, in week 1, holding a really good Texans offense to 9 points and putting up 14 points and playing really precise football for Matt Stafford against one of the best defenses unit in football. I expect, as you can tell, big things from the Texans this year, and I don't take it lightly that the Rams were able to stave them off in week 1. This offense certainly isn't going to slow down, and I cannot imagine the Titans to keep pace with them. I like the Rams a lot as a great value pick here in week 2. I'm a little bit concerned about the Lions against the Bears. Lions only putting up 13 points in week 1. They should beat the Bears. Most teams should. And they still have a ton of talent on offense. They just don't have Ben Johnson calling plays. But I am nervous about it, given the fact they were only able to put up 13 points, and we still don't know the true identity of the Lions this year after losing their offensive defensive coordinator to head coaching positions in the 2025 offseason. Vikings are hosting the Falcons on Sunday Night Football here in prime time. Ultimately, I just don't trust J.J. McCarthy enough to use my week 2 survivor pick in the Vikings, and that's the real reason I'm avoiding the Vikings in Minnesota here in this pick. Other than that, this is still a Vikings team that won 14 games last year. Really, the only change they made was at quarterback. A little bit of a weakness in offensive line, especially with Christian Darrisaw out. But my real concern here, as you can tell, is the quarterback position for Minnesota. So that's why I'm staying away from this. But cannot deny that there's some value there for Minnesota here. Chargers and Raiders, I didn't put as a true perceived caution because I do think the Chargers are legit and for real, and I don't think the same about the Raiders, but this is a divisional opponent on the road kind of game and something you should be wary of if taking the Chargers this week. And then finally, the Packers on Thursday Night Football are hosting the Commanders. Both these teams are playoff caliber. Both these quarterbacks have been playing really good football, but I do give the nod at quarterback to Jaden Daniels. Hard not to at this point. Again, Love, even with his really deep receiving core, continues to prove inconsistent in the medium, throws in the intermediary range. That could be the difference in this game against a team like the Commanders that doesn't make a lot of mistakes on either side of the football. Something to be cautious of there. Thanks again, everyone, for tuning into this video. Best of luck in Survivor in week 2, and can't wait to see you again in week 3.